Former governors of River and Bayelsa states, Honorable Amechi and Saraki Dixon, have warned that Nigeria's democracy faces grave danger from persistent electoral fraud and growing voter apathy capable of endangering the 2027 election. The duo lamented the political manipulation and weak institutions have continued to undermine citizen sovereignty. Former River State Governor and ex-Minister of Transportation were blunt in the assessment, declaring that no sitting government could deliver true electoral reform. On his part, Saraki Dixon described electoral fraud as the coup against the people, urging the National Assembly to strengthen the laws and protect the sanctity of the ballot. Joining us now on the show to discuss concerns raised by former governors about the threat of electoral fraud and its effect on democracy is Kunle Adegoke, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Great to have you as always. Isn't this conversation futile about electoral fraud, electoral reforms? Because it looks as though to me that we know what the solution is, but we cannot solve the problem because of our own political gains. Uwe's report I was talking about came out after 2007 elections. One of the cardinal points of that report was that the president should not be one to pick an electoral umpire. This is 2022. A child that was born when the Uwe's report was released should be well over 15, 16 years today, going to 20 years. The president is still picking the electoral umpire, and we think we'll have free and fair elections. Another point is the judiciary. This same country where we are, look at the case of the Labour Party where a Supreme Court had given a verdict, but the factional chairman still parades himself despite the Supreme Court judgment. And we're talking about election being sane in this country. Isn't this country going through a state of selective implosion as we speak? And are we not just stretching the conversation by trying to see that, oh, we can change things when the actors are not ready to change it? Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so that's the question for you, sir.
You mean that is a question for me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. I thought you were still analyzing. Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Yes, our electoral process has a lot of challenges, and there is no doubt about it that we still have miles to cover in order to be ranked as organizing free and fair elections. But I do not think that the selection of the INEC Chairman is the albatross afflicting our electoral process, the requirement for it to be free and fair. When you look at it, there have been instances in this country. The INEC Chairman was appointed by the president and went through the normal process of Senate confirmation and what have you. And the incumbent still lost the election. For instance, President Jonathan against Buhari in 2015. So it means yes. Well, it's an instance anyway. So, but I believe that in many cases, the incumbent party has lost elections in various states to the opposition. And the implication is that the party of the president does not determine victory at all times. In the past, there used to be such massive rigging that everybody would know that things were really amiss. But in recent times, with the innovations that have been introduced into the Electoral Act and steps that have been taken by political actors and non-political actors, monitoring process and what have you, we've been able to safeguard the process to a large extent. There are still challenges bedeviling the electoral process in Nigeria, and one cannot deny that. But we cannot put it at the doorstep of maybe the appointer. Somebody will definitely appoint. Some people have suggested that the Chief Justice of Nigeria should either be the one to appoint. There have been instances that the Chief Justice have been accused of maybe having sympathy for the party in power and what have you. The implication is that so far it is still being done by humans, and until we embrace the spirit of constitutionalism and readiness to be law-abiding, definitely we cannot get it right. Institutions have been created which are supposed to guide and guard the electoral process. And I believe that such institutions must just be made to work. The electorate themselves have a lot of roles to play when it comes to safeguarding the electoral process. And when you look into it, I'm a participant in the electoral process, going on the process leading to the governorship election, stated for 2026 in Osun State, and I've participated in several other electoral activities. And I can say that we have a lot on both sides, to cure for us to be able to say we have advanced as a civilized nation, ready to embrace rule of law and democratic process in Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much for your opening submission, Mr. Adegoke. Now, the National Assembly has reaffirmed its commitment to electoral reform ahead of 2027. So, building on what they did in 2022 with the Electoral Act of 2022. However, going to Mr. Rotimi Amaechi's statement, as Rufai had mentioned earlier, that no sitting government can truly deliver true electoral reform. I'd like to hear your take on his statement. Do you believe that any sitting government would have the political will to deliver true electoral reform in the interest of Nigeria and its citizens? And then, since we're now in the process of a potential electoral act ahead of 2027, what are some key details that must be corrected or enhanced from the 2022 version?
Right. When you look at the electoral process in Nigeria, it's regulated by law enacted by the National Assembly. The implication is that there is a law in place. Whoever is now saddled with the responsibility by the law to deliver on the electoral requirements and electoral process must be scrutinized, must be monitored to ensure that the outcome will actually reflect the democratic yearnings of the people. What I see about the ongoing reforms that the National Assembly is carrying out is the fact that we have realized on so many occasions, right from the 2007 presidential election, that our electoral process was bedeviled with a lot of shenanigans, a lot of wrongs. And based on that, commissions were set up to ensure that reforms were suggested, Ways Commission and what have you, and a lot of suggestions actually came up. Some of these suggestions have been incorporated in subsequent electoral acts. And when you look at the 2022 Electoral Act, it actually made a lot of provisions for the use of technology to advance the compilation and the counting of results, and so many other steps through which electoral process is normally rigged. And with that, with this innovation, we are talking about the introduction of IREV, uploading of results on real-time basis and what have you. Unfortunately, because these provisions were not actually built into the Electoral Act, we were not so much a mandatory requirement for INEC to comply with, more so that they were contained in the regulations issued by INEC. And these are challenges that were actually pointed out by the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court in the last presidential election, and also in many governorship elections that came up, based on the 2022 Electoral Act. When you look at what the National Assembly is doing right now, that provision is now being lifted from the regulations of INEC and being built into the Electoral Act. The implication now is that there will be compilation of results on real-time basis. There will be use of IREV, which reduces human intervention to a large extent, and manipulations that's used to characterize the previous electoral processes. So on this basis, I believe that such innovations, such amendments to the Electoral Act are actually aimed at guaranteeing free and fair elections. When you look at the recent Anambra State governorship election, the allegation has not been so much of INEC misgivings on maybe the compilation of results, transmission of results, and what have you. It has been more on political actors and activities in terms of maybe vote buying and what have you. And I believe that if we are able to surmount some challenges that have characterized the electoral processes in the past, we can as well profile solutions and changes to current challenges that we actually have. So I will want to commend and encourage the National Assembly to still proceed to ensuring that we have this process sanitized as much as possible. When you look at the allegation by Honorable His Excellency, Honorable Rotimi Amechi,
yes,
with respect to the issue of maybe a sitting government delivering on electoral promises and what have you, I believe that it is possible. It's a question of the political will. And there have been instances when, yes, it might be characterized with some maybe anomalies and what have you, but the opposition will still win. For instance, in Osun, the last election, it means that the government of Buhari
Mr. Adegoke,
was ready to abide by the results.
Yes, sir. I would really love for you to be specific. Are there some areas, some people have spoken around IREV, transmission of results, electoral courts, special courts for trying offenses immediately. Are there some specific things you'd like to see in the act, as we go through the process that would strengthen our electoral processes? Just some specific areas that must be dealt with.
In fact, these are things, yes. Yes, these are things that I believe that the National Assembly is actually working on. You remember that the last presidential election, the electoral contests in the various courts that came up were actually based on transmission of results, which means that people were really not complaining about those other allegations that we used to have in the past in terms of maybe thuggery, snatching of ballot boxes. And yes, they occurred in some places, but they were quite minimal compared to what we used to have in the past. I've not read any such allegation in the recent Anambra state governorship election anyway, but we've had situations in the past when people used to complain about transmission of results because what people actually voted at the polling units and people were satisfied with, and such results announced at the polling unit to the satisfaction of everybody, there were allegations that such results, before they were taken to the compilation stage at the ward level or at the local government level, changes were being made and what have you, and that what was actually announced at the polling unit before it to be transmitted through the technological device of beavers and what have you, changes, were occurring, illegal changes were occurring. And this, I believe, are now being taken care of by real-time the online transmission of results. Okay. And it is no longer optional for INEC to do that, looking at what is being done right now. So I believe that this is a critical point that will checkmate, rigging of results from the polling units to the transmission level.
Okay,
however, the implication is that with the adoption of technology, which I believe should rather be embraced much more and should be made mandatory on INEC. That is already being done. Then the second thing that we need to look at on the part of the
before
law,
you get on that next point, if you can just add it to your response to my question, just in the spirit of making sure we use our time efficiently. I'm glad you used the example of the Anambra election, where, the general consensus is that the system within itself worked. And now our challenge is external. And specifically, it's a monetization problem. The elections have always been monetized, but now we're seeing that monetization focusing in a different dimension. Now, some might argue and say, what we saw in Anambra shows us that the piece of paper in itself, or that is the legislation of the Electoral Act 2022, is actually a good legislation, a good piece of legislation. However, what do we do with elements such as monetization, with external factors? If INEC is able to work, no problem. But the question is, what's the point of having an INEC that works in a silo when there's still all these other interferences happening externally, especially monetization? What are your recommendations? Is the monetization of our elections something that can be resolved through legislation, or is it more of a political problem that we need to find some sort of a political and social or even civil solution to?
Right. When you look at the situation that occurred in the Anambra election, it is a proof of the fact that no law is self-executory. No law can enforce itself. It requires human will. And in bringing this to bear, we must realize that political actors and non-political actors who play a lot of roles, in the electoral process have a lot to bear in this regard. Yes, when you look at vote buying, which was the major allegation that I've heard about the last election, the Anambra election, there are two sides to it, the supply side and the demand side. In many cases, you see political actors being the ones actually even offering to people so that they could vote for them. There have been instances when you see that it is even the electorate themselves that are demanding that until they are given something, they will not vote for the party who is trying to be law-abiding. It happened to me. I was campaigning in 2017, preparatory towards the Osun State APC gubernatorial election. And in the process of delivering on our manifestos that we believe were quite rich in economic reform policies and what have you, so one woman sitting in front just said, "Olowole Egbaja," in Ijesa dialect, which means that it is a rich man that buys a dog. Does that mean that she is a dog to be bought by anybody who brought money? And that is the situation that we have found ourselves. If the supply side is willing to give and people are rejecting, yes, people will say, definitely we must realize that where people, the Yoruba will say, "Mi ò fẹ́, ó ṣàgbà mo bùn ẹ́," that is, I don't want, is superior to I want to give you. So where the electorate themselves realize that it is their future they are mortgaging and are rejecting such offers, you discover that it will even be difficult because somebody who wants to offer you a bribe, the moment you reject it, we even have a sense of shame. And we realize that that process cannot be mortgaged through that process. But a situation where people are celebrating being given money to vote and are shouting, dancing, saying, "Diboko Sebe," that is, vote and have a pot of soup and cook a pot of soup. It means that the electorate themselves are not mature enough to deliver on electoral demands, on democratic demands. We have a situation where people will say, yes, poverty has been weaponized, people are so poor, they cannot even think and what have you. But these are the same people who have passed through the past 4 years without being induced to do anything. So, and they know that these amounts being offered cannot solve their problems. And any solution that cannot quench your hunger definitely is not a solution.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Adegoke. But it's you, the politicians, that taught them money in politics. You are the ones that first introduced it to them. They are just following in the footsteps of you politicians. Thank you so much for your time.